Alright, I'm going to walk through the principles of electroplating magnesium. Ever seen a magnesium-based race car on fire, you'll realize just how furious that metal burns. So, the idea of getting it to plate with oxide is pretty difficult, but it's the electroplate that I'm going to show you isn't your common theory to electroplating. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this hot particle, we're going to put it inside of a tube, and the walls of the tube have hematite and clays and salts and stuff inside the body, so that as it's blasting around smacking the walls, the temperature of the hematite will allow basically the dust to come loose from inside this body and basically hammer itself to the magnesium. So you'll have a plated material, but not necessarily the way that it's commonly done. So this video is going to show you the molds, how to pre-dry clay parts, because you're going to need different consistencies of hematite in the clay versus stronger, high temperature, blah. I mean, it's just, I'm going to walk through it as quick as I can so that hopefully it'll make some sense. Right now it's just using plaster of Paris to scribe out molds so that I can make the parts. The little bit of clay work there, I'll discuss the mixtures here in a minute. And then basically taking the part, painting out the mold, and then attaching the hard parts to the soft clay parts so that you can start assembling it with the idea that it won't crack. But basically paint it all out with a wet clay. You'll notice that it dries very quickly against a dry surface of the plaster of Paris. Directly after that, I start dropping the pieces in and then filling in the gaps. This particular clay mixture doesn't have a lot of hematite in it. This needs to be stronger than the need for the hematite, which will be a higher mix when it goes inside here. So basically when I get it all done, I've added, it's quite a bit more hematite inside this particular clay that fills this gap. And what I do is I hand fill this gap, knowing that this is where my tube is going to be. And basically I make the skeleton of the it's basically fishing, sorry, not fishing, it's weed whacker string, and then I made some molds to hold everything together so I could assemble the pieces, and used hot glue basically to hold not only the string but to hold the shape, etc. So when it cools off, I've got my exit shaft and then the top ring exit shaft. Directly after that, basically apply it into the clay and start pressing the bottom area in, keeping in mind that each of these have to go under and over. You want the rotation and interaction through this tube to basically know that the material is so fine that it's in a circular motion going through this tube, and that'll be explained in another video. But for now, that's part of the process to make sure this material has its under and overs to keep the rotation going. And if you're not familiar with rotation and how that rotation can allow a matter to sort of tear itself apart versus hold itself together, it's going to be some reading involved there. Directly after that, just get them all in place and then start laying them down a little at a time, and make sure that when you get up to the top section that you're going to leave about an inch gap between the in this case the bottom and then the top area. Directly after that, just keep working it in and working it in. This particular hematite is also the clay hematite mix is a little bit rich, and it's sort of sticky and a little hard. Not something you paint in. You have to put this all in by hand, and then as you go, you'll get to the point where the unit itself will start to blend in. You'll have your gap in here, and then directly after that, just smoothing everything out so that you know that your upper sections A lot of times we pre-make these clay parts. They're kind of like you would refer to as cobblestones. I mean, we're making a pre-made dry part to put in here so that you can wet this down, put the dry part in, and then blend it all in. And then when it's time to cover these up, you'll have your hardened portion, not as much hematite in this cutout area. I'll show you the mold in a minute to it. And then you can fill this in. You don't have to worry about it cracking quite so much. That's the basics for that. All right, directly after that, we're going to get into all of it, I guess. When I'm doing the molds, a lot of times what I do is I just sit down and 3D print and basically change what it is I want it to do so that I can get the right size parts together. And then basically I just make the mold in the correct size for this piece. And then what I do is making sure that I'm going to cut the parts out when I make the indentation inside the mold so that these parts will come out individually. Try to get a little farther along with this. Oop, that is a, why don't we just cancel that and we'll go to the next one here. The hematite clay stuff, basically when you're doing the clay, you want to mix different measurements of the hematite. A lot of this is just trial and error. I cannot give you any good information on this, but what it comes down to is that, you know, mix up a little bit of the hematite for the strength in a cone 7 to 10 clay. And then the other issue with this, which is kind of hard to explain, is that you need to take some salt and water, say a gallon. Take your regular, you know, water softener, salt, drop it in there, warm water, stir it up, shake it up, stir it up, shake it up, and basically wait until the salt will not dissolve anymore where there's still sitting salt. And whatever you do, don't pour that into the clay. What will basically happen is you'll have way too much salt in the mixture. Start with about a gallon jug of clay and about 1/3 of a cup of salt water, and then turn around and add, you know, another 1/4 of a cup to 1/2 a cup of the hematite. Start with 1/4 for the hardening and about 1/2 a cup for the tracks. So when you get that all done, basically add regular old, you know, clean water and keep mixing until you can get a consistency you can work with, because usually when you get the clay it's just a big block, so that makes it much more interesting. After that, same story as earlier, you know, make sure that you get your tracks done, your upper and lower sections. So what it comes down to is that the feed comes in, it runs through this track and back out through the upper section. That'll be in another video, so that there's, you know, it's enough to blast you with this one. And then last but not least, the actual process. Oop, I've already covered this. So that might be it for now. There's not a lot more information to add other than, you know, practice makes perfect. This thing is going to be a, you know, an interesting thing to see when you put the power to it to ignite the materials that are in there, and how to make your strings and all. I mean, basically I was making just simple molds to hold things in place, and then, you know, you can make the smaller mold, which is just cut with a nail, and then make another mold larger so that when you know you've got all your pieces where they'll fit with a gap between them, much larger than this one. As soon as that's all done, you're basically ready to start assembling. That's it. Hopefully that'll work, and we'll try to get into the next section of this shortly.